My name's Nisha Duggal. I'm an artist working across media, as Debbie said, with a bit of a focus on the moving image and also with a sort of collaborative, socially engaged practice. So yeah, I recently finished this 3-month artist residency at Powis Castle, where I was working mainly with the Clive Collection. And it was a short project. It was a part-time 3-month residency, and it was research based. There wasn't like an outcome that I needed to have at the end of it, because the National Trust really wanted me to work with kind of speaking to people and feeding into their wider body of research, which they're doing about the display of the objects. So they had identified a couple of key groups that they wanted me to work with. The volunteers who have been, you know, working at the museum for a lot longer than a lot of the National Trust staff, I believe. They have really close relationships with the objects in the collection, and also have a lot of contacts with the people who are going in to look at the work, and also with the visitors. So I kind of, for me, it was a really interesting project to work on, because it was a chance for me to go in and bring my kind of approach as an artist, my kind of vision as an artist into this really unique setting, which I really didn't know very much about, and that, you know, that's always a gift as somebody who's making stuff. So in fact, it would have been really good for me if the seminar had been done kind of just at the end of 2019, because it's been so interesting listening to the other presentations and really relevant to the stuff that I was doing. So, I mean, I'm just going to talk for about 10 minutes. I'll kind of share the journey of what I kind of came up with on this residency, and it probably makes sense to start with a wee bit of background on my work, just so you get an idea of kind of where I'm coming from. I was born in the UK. I'm proud to be a first-generation immigrant, or a second-generation immigrant. I'm not quite sure which terminology is supposed to use. I studied fine art at the University of Derby and then later the Slade. So I'm kind of very much schooled in this sort of Western canon of contemporary art, and that's where I operate. However, in my work, I'm always kind of slightly drawn towards making work that has a bit of an Eastern slant. I work with other people, and I'm really interested in kind of making projects that give a kind of a platform for many, many different types of voices. I try and put together disparate sort of ideas or things, and kind of see my role as making connections between them. So there's this kind of oneness to the stuff that I'm interested in. I'll share my screen now and just show you some images. This is a piece called Born Free, which I made when I was an art student. I was kind of, a lot of the things that I'm interested in is trying to work out people's motivations in kind of making things and creativity. So yeah, I made some like trailers with art, and then the soundtrack. I use music quite a lot in my work, was Mark Monroe's Born Free. Quite a few years later, this is another project that I made called Flat-like Reflections, which was a commission for Sight Gallery in Sheffield. So now I'm kind of taking the lens and sort of working with people outside of my kind of social circle. So for this project, I'd been on a holiday in India and noticed that at the time in the UK, I don't know if you're familiar with Ali G, who's, I think it's a character played by Sacha Baron Cohen, and everyone was doing this sort of hand flick, which I embarrassingly can't do. And I went on a holiday to India to visit my family, and noticed kids in the street in Delhi were doing the same thing, and I just thought it was really interesting. So for this project, I advertised on the local media, and got I think it was about 60 people just came, and then they were paid to perform the hand flick to camera, and it's just loops of their interactions. So there's kind of different layers of culture and identity and things that are kind of coming in. This is just a still of a recent painting that I made. A lot of the stuff, I'm really interested in the haptic and this kind of sensory qualities of making. This is a painting from a series called Pinch, Swipe, Tap, Zoom, and it's simply just me getting my fingers covered in paint and kind of on paper working the gestures that we all make on our smartphones. And this is a project that I worked on last year, which was a residency at the Walthamstow Wetlands, which is a nature reserve in London. I was kind of using this idea of expanded workshops. So people were working with clay, and then as they were making, I was kind of recording us chatting, and the film is sort of taking in and comparing these ideas of bird migration. There's a hell of a lot of birds in this nature reserve, and then human migration, and kind of comparing and contrasting and finding those kind of primal impulses that are kind of underneath a lot of these things. And so then this project at Powis Castle came up, and it was something that I applied for, and I hadn't actually visited the castle. I just looked at pictures of the collection online and thought they looked really interesting. So I proposed a sort of project that working with the items of the collection, and I was really keen on sort of touching them. I think the phrase that I used was I wanted to do like an alternative taxonomy of the objects, and almost imbuing the objects with narratives of where they might have come from, or the people that made them. So this sensory thing of touching them was really important to my initial ideas. I had this kind of idea of touching things with green gloves on, and then using sort of digital technology to project images of India, or my memories of India, onto these objects. So it's almost kind of reaching into them. These are just little sketches of stuff that I was making when I was there. And I was reading a lot of books. As I said, I didn't know very much around this subject. And these are just copies of some of the books that I was recommending to Powis to put into their little library. They've got a selection of books inside the museum. And I went on to reading a lot about, well, not a lot, it was a 3 months residency, but quite a bit about Wales and the kind of colonial history of Wales and Scotland, and how that kind of relates to the sites. I was finding those things really interesting. This is an early copy of Land of My Land. I don't know how to pronounce it in Welsh, the Welsh national anthem. So all of these things, when I make work, it's kind of like a melting pot of lots of different things that kind of come together. All of this reading meant that I was getting quite pissed off with Clive, because, it's my heritage, but it's not, you don't grow up talking about the colonial rulers of the country your family's from. It's, I don't know. So, and you've got to bear in mind, when I'm working on this project, it's in this amazing castle that was all built with, the money siphoned off from these places. So it's all the luxury surrounding it. It's all interesting. And then obviously the objects in the Clive collection, I became really interested in framing and the way that these objects are placed in heritage, and how history is sort of written for the populace that way. How people, I don't know, how myths happen, I suppose. Like for example, I thought this was really interesting. I'd always heard of the Indian Mutiny. And then I was reading, I can't remember which book, that said in India, if you referred to the Indian Mutiny, people wouldn't know what you mean, because over there it's called the First War of Independence. And so it's trying to, I don't know, the subtleties of language and semantics, and how they shape how people act and feel, are sort of things that were becoming interesting to me. And alongside all of this work, I was running workshops with the volunteers, with school groups, to try and kind of, I don't know, I like to get ideas from works, but for work by talking to people. And this was a painting that I came across in my research that kind of brought it back to the beginning for me. It's a Joshua Reynolds portrait of Clive and his family, but I found with an Indian nanny, and I think this was, and it still is, the first time I think I've ever seen, and this is something that I'd never really noticed, that I hadn't seen this before, a picture of somebody who looked like me in a kind of Western old painting. And that that made me think that, I'm not a historian, I'm not an expert, this subject is massive, but the thing that I can bring to this project as an artist is my own sort of personal experiences. And so then I was thinking about my own memories as an immigrant of India, and the sort of nostalgia I feel when I approach these objects in a museum. I chatted to my family about it. It was interesting. This is just a little sketch. This is an old Indian film called Mother India that I can remember watching when I was a kid with my parents, and then I was just projecting images of it whilst I was in the museum and kind of, trying to touch it or reach into the frame. And so it wasn't an output-led residency, but I'm an artist and I'm always making things. So I was taking little bits and bobs of footage of things while I was there. And I ended up pulling together a really short film. It's like 2 minutes long. It was kind of like a sketch, but I'm sort of thinking of it as an artwork in its own right. I'm going to share it with you, and I'm just going to play it now. It may be I don't know, it might develop into something else later on. It's quite nice having this kind of time to breathe. And I'll just play it now and then we'll finish the talk.
ये मेरे पुरखों की ज़मीं मुझे बहुत प्यारी है। ये कवियों, ये गायकों और बड़े लोगों की ज़मीं। इसके देशभक्तों ने जहाँ अपना खून बहाया है, ज़मीं ओ मेरी ज़मीं। जब तक समुंदर एक दीवार है, इसकी जुबां हमेशा रहेगी। पर्वतों की ज़मीं, कवियों का स्वर्ग, हर घाटी, हर चोटी इसकी सुंदरता को बचाए है।